okay, Brazil, like I said before, it's a huge country, just like the U.S., right? Any country, even Colombia is not even that big of a country, right? I mean, it's big territory-wise, but it has like 58 million people. It's not the biggest population, but even one city is totally different from the other one in terms of like
Hmm.
the type of people, the traditions. You go to Medellin, Medellin is like, sorry for anybody who is in Medellin or who loves the city. I think it's a great city, but there is a degeneracy in that culture that is
Hmm.
like beyond anything else. And you're just not going to find that same level of degeneracy or those values or even the conservative values, because there's a flip side to Medellin most people don't know about, which is how conservative that city is. There's a degeneracy and the stuff that most of the foreigners interact with, but there's a really hardcore, like I'll say, like almost like Germany in the 1930s type conservatism, and it's big in Medellin. So you have a variety there. I would say that in Brazil you have actually the same thing, but it's more across regions. And Sao Paulo is a very liberal, progressive city. So and then you have cities like Rio, which is not necessary. It's also liberal and progressive, but it's more than that. It's libertine. So you have a lot of people. They freely love and do whatever they want. You seen it. You walk down the street. You see everything that's going on here. I mean, how would it be possible to show up here, specifically Sao Paulo, and find a traditional woman when they don't even define woman in one way?
Really?
Like, oh, so let me put you onto this, right? This what I thought was really interesting. I was trying to remember. There was a conversation I was having with someone about how they they couldn't. It wasn't even about the pronouns or anything. They were just like, we can't even discuss what a woman is. They were. So this was at a I think a market or something. I was like buying some fruits or some fish or something, right? And they were telling me, you can't even say like, you can't address somebody by pronouns or say like, oh, this guy is very talented, because people will interrupt and be like, "Yo, how do you know he identifies as
Oh,
a
same
guy
thing
or
as the
something?"
states.
It sounded even worse. It
Really?
sounded yeah, it sounded even more ridiculous.
Wow. So these dudes want to come to Brazil and they want to find a traditional wife, which I don't really find it to be, from the cities I've been to be traditional. I think at this point, your best bet for traditional is somewhere in Africa or in the Middle East or something, in some Muslim country. And I've even had some experiences with Muslims that would make me doubt that. Not from the Middle East, but from Africa, right? Uh,
Oh, and in the Middle East too.
yeah. Do you think
Like, go
that?
to Dubai. This, I mean, I'm not saying that's amongst Muslims themselves, but no, at least Muslim men. But man, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on. If you ask me, I think that the man, like where you can actually find traditional, that's tough.
Mhm.
That is really tough. I would say maybe in smaller cities. Um,
But do they even want the foreigners? Do they actually, are these women actually open to getting with a foreigner, or are they just doing it because they might be a reject, or how would their family view them? Like, what we spoke about this when we sat over there before. How do they actually view foreigners that come to date here?
that's an excellent question. I think you were following up on when I was saying how if we really talk about the cream of the crop, I want to go back to Medellin for a second, because everybody, even Casey, he was talking about this, right? I know I said I wouldn't, I didn't want to like put anybody on blast, but I think it's relevant, right? That he mentioned it, and I think he did a few videos talking about this, about how in Medellin, yes, you'll find some more beautiful women, but then the quality of person that they are, their basically their personality, their values, their intellect, all this stuff. You know that I've never had a problem. Like I have Colombian family, right? So there's females in my family, obviously, right?
Hmm.
You think the females, and you think I believe that the females in my family are degenerates, low IQs. And I have very beautiful family members, that have some younger cousins. Some of them are very attractive and beautiful girls, but they're smart. They're smart. They go to school. They're very well behaved. They're quite traditional. Obviously, I have a little bit more of an in, but even going out and about in society, I meet these women all the time. I've met them in Medellin quite frequently. They just don't really expose themselves to foreigners like that. They don't value foreigners the way that foreigners would like to be valued. They'll value foreigners similarly to their own men, but maybe with like an extra point of interest, like, oh, okay, maybe you have experiences that a local guy doesn't, right? But they don't value, at least not today, they don't value foreigners to the extent where they're like, oh, just because you're a foreigner, like regardless of your education, regardless of your job, regardless of how much money you earn, regardless of whether you speak the language or not, regardless of whether you understand my culture, regardless of what your intentions are in this country, I am going to submit myself to you and allow you to have basically sleep with me, right? When I'm creating a standard for a guy who's going through the protocols, right? Like I've seen this happen time and time again where the foreigners show up. And mind you, one of the things that's interesting, white foreigners actually have right now probably one of the worst reputations. And I heard a lot of white dudes complain. I've heard more white dudes now complain than probably any black dudes.
What complaints do they have?
I like the same BS that like, like there's like a lot of racism towards like white guys, and it's not. It's not racism towards white guys. It's that they see a. It's kind of like what Andrew Tate was saying one time. Like, it's not racism. It's like pattern recognition, right? You just see something happen over and over again. They see these white guys come over and over again. They believe that girls should be throwing themselves at them, and maybe initially some girls are. That point, which we talked about, which I thought was interesting, was it's not the best girls that are throwing themselves at them. Some guys do get it because some white guys are quality men, right? Some of them are good-looking guys who work out, take care of themselves. They have a good job. They have good education. They speak the language, right? They understand the culture. I have friends who are like this, right? They don't have problem meeting women either. So, like when it comes to meeting these women abroad, like I think that there's an appeal because some guys who make it through and then they're like, oh, look at what you got, right? Like maybe I could go down there and get that myself. But that's really case specific. And it's also market specific. Like, were there a lot of foreigners coming to this place at that time? Maybe not. Maybe you were the only foreigner that they met that was like this. So you're a rare commodity. Mm-hmm.
So you think that most of the foreigners aren't going to get the best women based off of that? Like
there's no. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but no, there's almost no chance. Like,
if the best one is a 10, what would the average foreigner get? 10 being the best, 1 being the worst.
Man, that changed a lot since 10 years ago until now. I would have said that like the ability for an average foreigner to get like let's say like a 5, a guy who's like considered like a 5 or a 6 to get like a 9 or a 10, that was actually possible back in the day. And I would say that right now that's not really going to happen. Maybe a 5 or 6. He could maybe get like a point or two above him, which is still not bad. That's better than nothing, or better than dealing with.
It's better than where they came from. You think?
Yeah.
They have a better shot outside the country than where they came from.
Right now, we're in a situation where I've seen this more frequently. I haven't seen that many. Like if you walk around a U.S. city, like New York or Los Angeles, I don't think you're going to see a guy who is considered fairly attractive, like walking around with or let's say unattractive, right? Like a guy who is fairly unattractive, like walking around with like a 9 or a 10. I just, unless he's really rich, like I don't ever see that happening. Uh, as a matter of fact, I'm starting to see the opposite trend. I'm starting to see more men who would be considered attractive, they're having to date down. They're with less attractive women, But that's in the West, right? Now, when you arrive to these places that we're talking about, places where there's still traditional, like non-Western culture, yeah, you'll see guys who they're like a 2 and they're with like an 8. You're like, wow, how is this possible, right? But it's a local guy. I almost never seen a foreign guy do that.
Okay, somebody said, Austin, asked him about what he said that night about Brazilian women looking for white foreign men. When you were talking about they're looking for the ideal foreigner.
Okay, I was talking about, it's not so much that that's what they're looking for. Actually, no, that's correct. They're not necessarily hunting for these foreign men, but they have determined in their mind that a gringo or a foreigner is what they're attracted to. So, I mean, we know, just as a matter of fact, like the majority of people on Earth, which are not Brazilian, right? So you take the 7,800,000,000 rest of the people, you divide that by half, and the 3 billion whatever males that are left over, like, I don't know what percentage of them are Caucasian, but it's not very high. It's a very low percentage, right? So anybody with like sufficient critical thinking skills would deduct that a foreigner outside of Brazil is going to be non-white, right? That's just going to be a fact, right? That's going to be the majority of the men that you meet. So how it comes into their mind that the only foreigners are white is crazy. And I was just talking about my experience because I remember I was talking to a couple of girls, just having a friendly conversation. And they were saying to me, like, yeah, because I speak Portuguese well enough, and at that time I had a very strong accent from Rio. So they said to me, like, there's, you could drop the act already, like stop pretending that you're a foreigner. And I was like, I'm a foreigner. I don't know what you're talking about. And I still have an accent in Portuguese. It's not like I don't. And they just refused to believe it. And then that's when I mentioned to you, I went into detail about that story, because the next day I met up with this guy who was from a Quilombo, which is like it's like a runaway slave community. Back when there was slavery, there were a lot of slaves would rebel and escape. They'd go into the countryside. So these are people who don't really have access to education. Many of the resources, they live kind of in a very rural, tribal conditions, right? And I'm speaking to this guy, and I ask him, "Do you think that I'm from Brazil?" And he's like, "No." I could tell by the way you're dressing, by the way you're speaking. This guy, he's probably illiterate. He could tell, because in his mind, he wasn't locked into an idea of what a foreigner was. He was locked into an idea of what a Brazilian was.